speaker in this session, who is Inge van der Jagt. Is that can you pronounce it? Because I'm going to do it wrong. She works for the Cultural Heritage Agency in the Netherlands. She's an expert in many issues that are relevant to the Rewilding Later Prehistory project, so it's really brilliant that she can be here today. So she plays a key role in overseeing Bone Info that she's already mentioned, which is a centralised database for animal remains in the Netherlands, and has contributed to the development of Archis, which is a site-based database. She also wrote a paper recently which looked at if and how we can talk about biodiversity through plant and animal remains data, which is obviously very useful to the project, and I'm hoping she's going to touch on that as well. She's also project leader of the National Archaeological Research Agenda in the Netherlands, and as such is very closely involved in the Cultural Heritage Agency's endeavours to facilitate cross-sector research. I'll leave it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. I wrote my presentation down because to keep on time, and because my English is okay, but not really great. Not as great as you native speakers are here. So I'm sorry I'm a bit reading, but I thought it made me feel better to read it. Dear colleagues, I'm Inge van der Jagt. I'm from the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, and Anne already said many things about me, but I'm also an archaeologist. I'm the product owner of the database Bone Info and project leader of the Dutch National Research Agenda. And this research agenda is an important starting point for the Dutch Synthesis project, which I will tell you more about in my presentation. In the talk I had with Anne in the preparation of this meeting, we discovered indeed that there were many interesting things I could tell you. So I would like to excuse myself in advance for putting so much information in only 20 minutes. And I divided therefore my presentation in 3 parts that all might be interesting to you and that also relate to each other in some way. The first part is about the centralized data sets we have in the Netherlands. And in the second part I will explain how we facilitate synthesis research. And in part 3 I want to highlight the lessons learned and conclusions of a small synthesis project on biodiversity from a bioarchaeological perspective. So part 1, the centralized data sets. The most important archaeological data set of the Netherlands is Archis, which is an abbreviation of Archaeological Information System. I think you can compare it with your HERs, your Historic Environment Records data set. In the Netherlands, Archis came into existence because we as Cultural Heritage Agency are legally required to offer a system for the registration and consultation of archaeological excavations and other types of archaeological interventions. So-called archaeological chance finds or loose finds that are also recorded in it. And of the archaeological scheduled monuments on a national level. These 3 elements are all in Archis. The type of information that is recorded is about the location of an archaeological investigation, the nature of the site, the finds, traces and structures found, and the report and the sources containing more information about the archaeological project. All this information is made visible in combination with digital map layers such as the topographical map, elevation map, soil map, land use map, and so on. This is an example. Which makes it possible to use the data in spatial analysis. The fact that up-to-date information about all archaeological interventions and finds is stored in Archis makes that this dataset is a valuable source of information to do archaeological desk research, to value sites prior to an archaeological excavation, and for more scientific or synthesis research. In the synthesis projects I will tell you later about, this is an important starting point of the research. Although nowadays data mining of reports is becoming more important as well. So not only Archis but also the data mining part. The University of Leiden is developing this more in their Exalt program. Beside information about archaeological excavations in Argis, a lot of project data, including many site reports and some databases from archaeological excavations, are stored in the e-depot of Dans. Dans is the Dutch National Center of Expertise and Repository for Research Data. This repository makes published research verifiable and reproducible, and it allows other researchers to access this data and use it for new research. It's comparable to ADS, Tim told us about this morning. In addition to Argis and Dans, there are several other systems in the Netherlands in which primary archaeological research data can be found. They are listed on the slide. There are datasets for coins, metal finds, dendrochronology, maritime archaeology, corings and wooden objects. And at the moment, datasets are made for C14 and isotope data. I can't tell you about all of them in more detail, but I will give some more information about Boninfo and Radar, the two at the top, which are both bioarchaeological datasets and therefore probably of most interest to you. Boninfo and Radar are both Access databases at the moment. Of Boninfo, a downloadable extract is available on the internet. Unfortunately, the link is behind the chairs. In future, we hope that we can connect both the datasets to Argis because it is sort of an extension of the datasets. So we are working on that in developing. So we are working on the development of Argis, and we try to connect both datasets to Argis. Boninfo contains information on animal remains, both vertebrates and invertebrates, and some human remains. And Radar contains information on botanical macro remains of only higher plant species, no pollen or wood. Both consist of data from as many specialist reports as we know of Dutch archaeological excavations and finds. So not only excavations, also other types of archaeological finds. Both databases came into existence in the 90s to make specialist reports more easy to find, because they were for a large part grey literature at that moment. I'm product owner of the dataset Boninfo, and my colleague Otto Brinkamper, some of you might know him, is the equivalent for Radar. Besides the bibliographic reference of the report itself, the databases contain metadata on excavation, including excavation date and location, the nature and the size of the find complex, as well as the method of collection, age and function, and some other things. And a list of identified species. As I mentioned, all species are listed in Boninfo Radar. Yes, I've included an overview of the tables of the databases and the information that is in it, but it is quite extensive, and I've already talked to you about it in the previous session a bit, and I'm happy to talk more into detail to you about it later. For now, I will skip this because of the time. This is Radar. So I can say Boninfo has a kind of different structure. They are both set up in not at the same period. So Radar was after Boninfo, and they had slightly different angles. But in principle, it's the same. It is a report and a list of species with information about that. To give you an idea about the size of the datasets, I included this slide. As you can see, it contains quite an extensive amount of data on bioarchaeological remains found in Dutch excavations. You see the amount of sites, samples and clusters. I already explained cluster is kind of similar to species list. The amount of records with taxa. So these are all listed. Like this is the amount of taxa that's in it, and the amount of unique taxa that's on it. And it can be names not only the taxonomic names, but also like archaeological names or terminology like sheep goats, or higher taxonomic names like Cervidae instead of only the species name Cerviculatus. And the oldest publication for radar is quite old. For Boninfo is also quite old, but less old for radar. And the latest data entry. At this moment, my colleague Otto Brinkamper and myself are responsible for entering new data. This takes much time, so we have a backlog of things that still needs to be done. In recent years, we have issued a contract to a commercial specialist party to do a bit of this work for us. For radar, this was done in 2017, and for Boninfo in 2022. But for Boninfo, I can say we still need another round to be more or less up to date. In the future, we hope that it is possible that the specialists can enter their own data, and that will be possible if we make the connection with Argus, and then they will use the same entry date point as the archaeologists used for Argus. So this was the first part about the datasets. Now I will move on to the synthesis. In potential, all these datasets I've mentioned facilitate synthesis. In previous years, we learned, however, that a financial injection is necessary to simulate synthesis of development-led research. Just after the turn of the centuries, policymakers began to realize that since the Valletta Convention, the number of archaeological excavations exploded. That's the top figure on the left, right. Yeah, left figure. But that the synthesis based on the site reports lagged behind. That's the lower figure. This was confirmed in 2011 by the evaluation of the Dutch Heritage Act. The conclusion was that the archaeological heritage management cycle was grinding to a halt at the point of interpretation and synthesis. That's the stop sign in the circle here of heritage management. And development-led archaeology was therefore not producing enough new insights into the past. Policymakers tried to turn the tide by instigating several funding programs that contributed to the synthesis of development-led research. The first two programs, on the left of the slide, already started before 2011. The first one was called Valletta Harvest and stimulated synthesis based on archaeological research. It was mainly performed by universities. The intention of the second program, called Odyssey, was slightly different. It was to analyze and publish still unpublished archaeological research from the years before the Valletta Treaty. The other two, on the right, are a direct response to the evaluation from 2011. The second Valletta Harvest project was launched in 2012 and had the same aim as the first one, namely to develop new knowledge and new ideas about the past by synthesizing the results of development-led archaeological research from the Valletta era. But this time a wider group of archaeologists could perform the research, and the subject of the synthesis was also chosen in a different way than before. I will tell you more about this on the next slide. Since 2016, the project has taken on a structural character, and now a yearly budget of €250,000 is available. After 2016, a new project started that also provided for synthesis, although with a slightly different goal. It was called Pre-Malta, and its motto was new knowledge from old excavations. The aim of the Pre-Malta project was to use natural science methods and techniques like DNA or isotope research to investigate archaeological remains from old unstudied excavations. Besides this main goal, the project also wanted to show the value of archaeological remains and data kept in archaeological depots and promote the use of natural science methods and techniques in Dutch archaeology through good examples. Because of a limited budget, these syntheses are not about complete unpublished excavations like Odyssey, but instead focus on specific data sets from one or more of these old excavations whose study would provide a lot of new knowledge. In order to get an idea about our approach of the synthesis project, I will tell you something more about the second Valletta harvest one. So the basis of every synthesis in this second Valletta harvest project is the research question from the National Archaeological Research Agenda. These research questions are based on knowledge gaps in Dutch archaeology. It's number 2 on the slide. In combination with the amount of potential knowledge in a good number of site reports, number 1, so we look at what's already published in site reports, this leads to subjects that are suitable for synthesis, so-called knowledge opportunities, number 3. And the knowledge opportunities are transformed into synthesis topics. When a synthesis topic is identified, the next step is to write a research proposal. This is done by RCA, so Cultural Heritage Agency researchers. When we don't have the right expertise in our team, external experts are consulted. After a research proposal is ready, a research assignment or research brief is put on the market, after which different parties can submit a tender. These parties can vary from academics to commercial archaeologists, specialists, or governmental organizations. And the fact that this is not only academics is of course very important for increasing the quality and expertise of development-led archaeology. When the submission deadline has passed, the tenders are evaluated by us using transparent evaluation criteria mentioned also in the research brief. In the evaluation, the quality of the research and the composition of the research team is of greater importance than, for instance, the budget, although there is a maximum. The party with the highest overall score gets the contract. From 2011 onwards, this resulted in 17 syntheses. As you can probably see, most of them are in Dutch, but this will change. Recently, we decided to strive for as many English syntheses as possible to reach out to our international colleagues. The syntheses that are produced not only contain the actual synthesis based on the research questions, but also a conclusion about quality and usefulness of data from site reports and suggestions for improvement of fieldwork, research and reporting practices in development-led archaeology, and suggestions for new research questions or adjustments of the old research questions in the National Archaeological Research Agenda. If you want to know more about the Valletta Harvest Project, you can read the article about it in the Knowledge for Informed Choices publication, which is free downloadable on the internet, or contact my colleague that was and is responsible for this project, Monique Inge. So that leaves me with the last part 3, which is about biodiversity in bioarchaeological perspective. I would say a small synthesis project. The synthesis of the Valletta Harvest Program are cultural-historical in nature and not specifically bioarchaeological or methodological for that matter. Although certain themes touch the subject of bioarchaeology, like the synthesis on urban farming or wooden and bone artifacts. I don't know of any archaeological project similar to the Rewilding Later Prehistory project in the Netherlands. But recently there has been a plea for incorporating more archaeological data into the study on biodiversity and nature conservation by historical ecologists or eco-historians. You can see 2 publications about the subject of changes in biodiversity and the difficulty of remembering how nature looked like in the past on the slide. Both mention the importance of bioarchaeological data for their field of study. In fact, before writing the book on the left, the authors contacted my colleague Otto Brinkemper and myself to ask if bioarchaeological data of Dutch excavations, that is recorded in Booninfo and Radar, could shed light on biodiversity changes in the past. We didn't know the answer, and in order to find out if it was possible and help them with their book, we did some analysis of the data to answer the question, is it possible to investigate past long-term changes in biodiversity using the available archaeozoological and archaeobotanical datasets? The research we did is a nice example of a small bioarchaeological synthesis using datasets that originated in development-led archaeological research. I would therefore like to tell you briefly about the lessons learned and our conclusions. In preparation during the analysis, we learned a lot about the data and its limitations. There were limitations of the datasets itself, like the fact that we could only do the analysis properly for vertebrate and higher plant species, that we could only look at the presence of species and not at the actual amount of remains found, because in Boninfo the number of remains were not recorded. We started recently with doing that, but we don't have it for the earlier entrances. And we needed to clean our species list to avoid species being counted twice. For instance, if Cervus was found in a certain period, we had to remove an identification of Cervidae in order to make sure that it was actually counted once. Besides that, there are also biases specific for archaeological data influencing our results, like the variation of preservation conditions at different excavations, the research intensity of archaeologists, for instance, per period or area. I know from the old days the universities had specific areas in which they did a lot of research or specific topics, so that kind of makes the picture a bit skewed, maybe. The method of excavation, did they use a coarse or a fine method of collection? For instance, did they sieve? And very important, the human influence present at the site we excavate. This means we probably don't find a representative reflection of the natural flora and fauna because humans make choices in what they eat and where they get their food. After reworking of the data and doing a lot of additional analysis to look at the influence of archaeological biases, we were able to come to the following conclusions. It is possible to get an idea of the species richness per main archaeological period, but archaeological biases make it difficult to explain the results. That's also why I'm not showing the results, but I'm happy to share it with you, because I think it triggers a lot of discussion about what we are actually seeing. Big data analysis can help overcome some biases like preservation conditions, research intensity, and excavation practices. I think this is reasonably to assume that this is the case. Plant remains seem to better represent the wild component than animal remains. Maybe it is because plant remains have more influences from the wild within the human settlement than animal remains. And also because plant remains are more frequently used to study the landscape. So the questions that they ask to plant remains and the type of samples they take is different than for the archaeological data. And I think when looking at the results, I had the feeling that animal remains were more influenced by socio-economic processes in the past. So that was one of the conclusions. And therefore, more research focusing on specific species categories, regions or periods, or the use of new methods and techniques is necessary to get grip on this wild animal component. If you want to know more about this research, for instance about the actual results, we can discuss this afterwards, as I said, or you can download this publication for free on the internet. Unfortunately, it's in Dutch with only a small English summary, but I guess nowadays Google Translate works very well. So. At least for me when making this presentation. For me personally, this research forms a starting point of wanting to know more about the subject. And that's why I was really excited to hear about your project here, about Rewilding the Later Prehistory, and to be actually present here today. So, with regards to the topic of this session, I would like to say in conclusion that Dutch datasets contain a wealth of information from the past that can be used for synthesis. But to stimulate synthesis, we use governmental subsidies for research on topics that relate to our national research agenda. We don't have special programs specifically focused on the synthesis of bioarchaeological data. But datasets like Boninfo and Radar do provide opportunities for this kind of analysis. And my experience is that active participation of specialists in existing programs increases their expertise in the field of their specialism, and the acquired research skills makes it easier to participate in new research projects or to obtain grants themselves. This was my presentation. I want to thank these colleagues for their input in my presentation, and I want to thank you for your attention. And I hope that my input was useful for your project, and feel free to ask me any questions today or in the future.